Near Times Square, there's an electronic billboard that tracks the debt of the US federal government. It was first installed in 1989 when the national debt was around $3 trillion. At the time of writing this, the national debt is over $19 trillion and is expected to hit $20 trillion before the inauguration of the next president. Since the debt clock was installed, the national debt has been a major political issue in the United States. That is, until this most recent election cycle. Neither the Republican convention in Cleveland nor the Democratic convention in Philadelphia talked about the national debt, which is in big contrast to the 2012 election where the Republicans had a national debt clock calculator installed on the main stage, or the 2008 election where Senator Obama criticized President George W. Bush for allowing the debt to get so high. Despite the current election cycle's unusual ignoring of the national debt, it is still an issue of concern to citizens. But who exactly does the United States owe money to? When people think of the national debt, they tend to think of foreign-held debt, which is a little over $6 trillion, which makes it about 1/3 or 33% of the national debt. China in particular holds $1.2 trillion in debt, or a little over 5% of the total, followed by Japan, who holds about $1.1 trillion, or also a little over 5%. Past the two of them, there is a dramatic drop-off, with the Cayman Islands holding $260 billion. So if only 1/3 of the national debt is owned by foreign nations, what about the other 2/3? The next largest segment of the national debt is held by the federal government itself. Official documents refer to this as intragovernmental holdings, but should be more accurately described as intergovernmental debt. This is when the government owes itself money. So how does this happen? The US Constitution gives Congress what is referred to as the power of the purse, meaning that it controls spending and taxes. Congress sets the budgets for different departments of the federal government. However, some departments don't have enough money to do the things Congress or President asks them to do. And sometimes there are departments that are allotted more money than they are asked to use. Let's say that Department A was allotted a $1 million budget, while Department B was allotted a $1.5 billion budget. Congress or the President asks Department A to spend $1.5 billion, while Department B is only asked to spend $1 billion. In order to fund Department A, the Treasury needs to borrow money, which they do by selling bonds. What then happens is that Department B will buy $500 million worth of Treasury bonds. That money is then given to Department A to fulfill its legal requirement to spend $1.5 billion. After this occurs, the federal government now owes Department B $500 million plus interest. Now I'm sure you're wondering, why doesn't the federal government just move money from one department to another as needed? This is because money allotted by Congress can only be transferred by an act of Congress. This means that in order to get that extra $500 million from Department B to Department A would require it to be voted on by Congress, which can be a long, drawn-out process. Doing this kind of accounting on the personal level would be the equivalent of taking money out of one pocket and moving it into another while giving that other pocket an IOU. The difference, of course, is that if an individual doesn't put money back into that first pocket, nothing happens. If the US government fails to do so, it could crash the US bond market. This crazy-sounding thing is why Social Security is underfunded. The federal government keeps borrowing money from it. This accounts for over $5.6 trillion, which equals about 29% of the national debt. Sticking with public entities owning federal debt, the Federal Reserve owns about 13% of the national debt, making it the single largest holder. Those of you familiar with how central banks operate will recognize the issue here with the Federal Reserve owning US debt. The Federal Reserve essentially has the power to print money. How it actually operates is a little more complicated than that, but that's a video for another time. In this scenario, the Federal Reserve can print money, which it then uses to buy federal debt in the form of treasury bonds. This has a lot of people worried because the US government could potentially borrow money infinitely to pay its bills and pay its debts. This is referred to by economists as debt monetization, which is also a video for another time. State and local governments own about 13% of the national debt, which is pretty odd considering that most local and state governments around the US are in the red. The rest of the national debt is owned by various private entities such as individuals or corporations. So, should we be worried about the national debt? Yes, but not for the reasons we always hear about. No individual country holds enough debt to force the US to change its policy. China isn't going to demand ownership of Alaska if it doesn't get paid. The biggest threat China could do is to sell off its holding of US debt, which some suspect it might be doing quietly anyways, which is also a video for another time. The fact that the US government owes most of its debt to other parts of government is something we should be concerned about, because they have just as much obligation to pay off that debt as they do foreign holders, but less compunction to do so. And if they can't, that will cause the bond market to crash, which would likely send the entire global economy into a tailspin. Are you interested in how local governments are engaging in a neo-feudalistic economic structure? Then click this annotation for a video about that. Or you can click this annotation to see CGP Gray's video about the US national debt. If you enjoyed this video and want to know when my new videos come out, then click that subscribe button. If you think this channel should be bigger than it is, then share this and other videos on different websites and platforms. If you have any thoughts about what was said in this video, or possibly ideas for future videos, then leave those in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.